They say the wind never stops blowing in Dagger Flats. The town sits like a forgotten scar on the edge of the Nevada desert, surrounded by rusted barbed wire and signs so faded you can barely read the warnings. Keep out, government property. But they don't keep anyone out anymore, because nobody comes. Not anymore. Once there were hundreds of people here. Miners, families, kids who chased tumbleweeds through the alleys. Then one day they were gone. No evacuation. No emergency. No survivors. The official records say it was a cave-in at the mine, a tragic collapse. But the bodies were never found. Not one. For years, stories drifted like sand through nearby towns. People said they saw lights flickering where the church steeple used to stand, heard voices whispering from the hollow shell of the general store. One hiker swore she saw a woman in a white dress standing at the entrance of the mine, mouth open. In a scream she couldn't hear. Most just dismissed it as desert madness. But then Eli Grant, a rising urban explorer with a following on YouTube, decided to uncover the truth. A weekend trip, he said. Just him, his drone, and his camera. One night, in America's spookiest ghost town, he didn't come back the same. Eli Grant wasn't a thrill seeker by nature. He was a documentarian in the YouTube age. One of the thousands chasing clicks by exploring abandoned malls, crumbling factories, and forgotten roadside motels. His niche was quiet exploration, guided by subtle narration and a calm, eerie aesthetic. No fake jump scares, no over-the-top theatrics. Just a camera, a flashlight, and the truth. So when one of his subscribers sent him an old grainy photo of a rusted town sign that simply read, Dagger Flats, Pop 132, with coordinates scribbled at the bottom, Eli's interest was piqued. But, cautiously so. He'd never heard of it. No records came up online, no images, no history, no mentions on ghost town forums. That was rare. Too rare. He sat up late the night before the trip, researching anything he could. The coordinates led to a speck of land in Nevada's high desert, miles away from any known settlements. There were no paved roads nearby, only dirt trails and broken fence lines. The nearest town was over 50 miles out, and even then, it was a 2 gas stations and a diner kind of place. The kind of place where people glance at strangers and pretend they didn't. But that's what made it perfect for the series he'd been planning. Forgotten places no one talks about. With his drone packed, batteries charged, and a few weeks' worth of protein bars and water jugs stacked in his trunk, Eli set off from Los Angeles. The desert crept in fast after the freeway ended. Yellowed hills, brittle brush, and a sky so wide it felt oppressive. After nearly 9 hours of driving, his GPS lost signal. All he had left was the screenshot of the coordinates. When he finally saw the weather-worn Dagger Flats sign, partially hidden behind a tilted barbed wire gate, a cold wind brushed against the back of his neck. He told himself it was just the temperature drop that happens after sunset. He started filming. The town itself looked like something out of an old Western film set. Only wrong. The buildings were real, but looked hastily built, too symmetrical, as if someone had tried to mimic what a town should look like without ever living in one. The saloon had no liquor bottles, only empty shelves lined with dust. The sheriff's office still had a coat hanging on the wall, but no badge. A church sat at the town's center, small and sun-bleached, its bell missing. On the outside, someone had scratched the word hollow into the wood in long, deep gouges. There was no sign of weather damage, no collapse from age. Everything was intact, just frozen in time, untouched. Eli swept the camera slowly, panning past a row of boarded-up homes. He tried one of the doors. It creaked open with surprising ease. Inside, the wallpaper peeled like shedding skin. A rocking chair sat still in the corner. On the mantel above the fireplace, someone had placed a photograph of a woman and a child. Their faces had been carefully cut out. Oddly enough, there was no dust inside the house. None, not even a speck on the floor. He tried speaking softly into the mic. "This place is preserved, almost too perfectly. It feels like someone was here just yesterday." He paused, listening to the silence. Or maybe they never left. Outside, the wind had completely stopped. Not a single blade of dead grass moved. Even the insects had fallen silent. Then his drone, set to auto-hover 100 feet overhead, sent back a flickering image. A glitch, it seemed. But when Eli looked at the screen, he saw movement near the edge of town. Not the wind, not a shadow. It was something tall, still, watching from the tree line. Then it was gone. He shook it off. "Probably a heat shimmer," he said, though his voice cracked slightly. "Or a coyote." He decided to keep going. This was what he came for, after all. The more he explored, the more things felt staged. A general store with cans neatly stacked in a pyramid. A diner with fake menus glued to the tables. A schoolhouse with alphabet cards nailed perfectly straight to the chalkboard. It was like walking through a museum exhibit meant to look lived in, but never was. And yet, that photograph, that coat, the feeling that someone had once moved through this place. As night began to fall, Eli set up a small tent beside the church, against his better judgment. He'd camped in stranger places, he reminded himself, and the drone's battery was low. He needed time to charge it before heading out again at sunrise. Around midnight, something changed. The church bell, long gone, rang. One soft chime. Eli sat upright, fumbling for his camera. He stepped out of the tent. The wind had picked up, again whispering low and dry. But the bell tower remained empty. No rope, no clapper, just open air. Then he noticed a light flickering inside the diner. He hadn't seen any electricity since he arrived. Eli grabbed his flashlight and pressed record. As he walked toward the diner, the door slowly creaked open, and someone whispered his name. Not, "Hey." Not, "Who's there?" They said his full name, Elijah Grant. The voice that called his name wasn't loud. It was soft, female, barely above a breath. But it was clear. It didn't echo. It didn't bounce around the walls of the diner. It came from inside. Eli stood still at the entrance, the flashlight trembling in his hand. He was trying to rationalize. Maybe a radio had picked up an old broadcast. Maybe someone else had followed him here. Maybe his mind, soaked in isolation and nerves, had started playing tricks on him. But then the flashlight flickered, once, twice, and went dead. The only light now came from inside the diner, a soft yellow glow that pulsed like candlelight. He reached for the camera screen, checking the feed. It still recorded, the night vision auto-switching to black and green. Inside, he could make out a figure sitting in one of the booths. He stepped through the threshold slowly. The light went out. In total darkness, Eli froze. A scraping sound came from behind the counter. Then, footsteps. Not hurried, not threatening. Just slow, deliberate steps moving across the linoleum floor. The temperature dropped so sharply that his breath fogged. Eli backed out of the diner without a word. He didn't run. Not yet. But he didn't look back either. Back in his tent, he sat with the camera screen lit in his lap. He replayed the audio. He listened carefully. And there it was again. Elijah Grant. Spoken clearly. But the voice had no background noise, no ambiance, no echo from the diner's walls. It was as if it had been recorded in a vacuum. or from right behind the microphone. Sleep didn't come. He stayed up until dawn, eyes scanning the horizon. As sunlight painted the desert in dusty gold, Eli packed up his gear and made a decision. He was going deeper. He needed answers. He began by walking out past the town's edge, toward the area where the figure had appeared on the drone footage. There he found a trail, not a walking path but tire tracks, deep, heavy ones leading into a rocky ridge. He followed them on foot for nearly half a mile. Then he saw it, a fence, newer than the town, thick metal, wrapped in 3 layers of barbed wire. Signs hung every 20 feet. Property of us Goft. Do not enter, no trespassing. No records. Exist, no records exist? That line didn't make sense. Behind the fence, partially buried in earth and rock, stood a structure, concrete, industrial. A bunker, or maybe an entrance to something deeper. There was no gate. No keypad. Just a solid steel door and what looked like a vent shaft above, humming softly. Not a sound you'd expect from an abandoned zone. He pulled out the camera and whispered into the mic. Looks like some kind of installation. This wasn't built a century ago. It looks active, recently maintained. He zoomed in on one of the signs. It had a black triangle logo, unfamiliar. No department name, no acronym. Just the symbol. He stayed for another hour, waiting to see if anyone would come or go. No one did, but on his way back toward town, he saw something that made him stop dead. In the dirt, partially buried beneath a tumbleweed, was a plastic ID badge. He picked it up. The photo had faded, but the name remained. Dr. Alice Renner, field psychiatrist. On the back, someone had carved 2 words with what looked like a razor. The Hollow. Back in Dagger Flats, Eli took shelter inside the church. As the sun reached its highest, heat waves shimmered off the rooftops. But inside, the air remained cool, unnaturally so. He set up a small workstation at the pulpit, reviewing footage, organizing files, and scanning the ID badge again and again. There was no record of Alice Renner online, no LinkedIn, no publications, no obituary. It was like she never existed. He noticed something else in the church, a trapdoor beneath the altar. He pried it open. A narrow staircase led downward into pitch black. With his flashlight restored, he descended slowly. The walls were lined with thick wooden panels, carved in repeating symbols, circles inside squares, connected by a cross-like stitch. They were eerily consistent, like some old code or sigil language. At the bottom, he found what appeared to be a holding room. Not a cellar, not a storage space. There were 5 iron chairs bolted to the floor, each with thick leather straps on the armrests and ankles. A table beside them held rusted syringes and rolls of gauze. On the far wall, drawings, dozens taped in a grid. Each one showed the same thing. A dark, faceless figure with long skeletal limbs and curved antlers. At the bottom of each drawing were children's names written in childish scrawl. Names like Billy, Rosa, and Tanner. Beneath the final picture, someone had written, "It lives beneath. It hears everything." Eli's voice cracked as he narrated into the mic. Whatever happened in this town, it wasn't ghosts. It was something else, something human, maybe both. That night, Eli tried to leave. He packed up the car, loaded his camera, and followed the same trail back to the road. But after 2 hours of driving, he saw something impossible. The Dagger Flats sign, the same one, same bent pole, same blood-red spray paint that read turned back across the top in someone's frantic hand. His GPS remained dead. His compass spun in circles. He had been driving in a loop. Back inside town, he sat at the edge of the sheriff's office steps, breathing heavily. Then the loudspeaker crackled to life, a speaker he hadn't noticed before, mounted on a post near the town square. It buzzed, hissed, then played a recording. Test subject E. Grant has entered Phase 2. Containment grid remains stable. Begin psychological assessment protocol. Eli stared at it, numb. What the hell does that mean? Then, a different voice, familiar now, whispered from behind him. You're not here to document. You're here to remember. He turned, but no one stood there, just his reflection in the cracked window. Except his reflection wasn't moving. It just stared and smiled. The reflection didn't match his movements. Eli raised his hand. The reflection stayed still. His heart thundered. He took a slow step back and the glass didn't respond. Instead, the version of him inside the cracked pane leaned forward. And then, it blinked. The smile widened. Eli stumbled away, the air thickening around him like smoke. He turned to run. But the streets were no longer empty. Figures stood motionless along the sidewalks, each one draped in old, faded clothing. Minors, children, women in 1920s dresses, men in dust-covered uniforms. All of them stared ahead with vacant eyes, pale skin stretched tight over bones, mouths slightly open. None of them blinked. They weren't alive, but they weren't quite dead either. Eli backed up slowly and his camera caught something just for a frame. The footage glitched, jumping like a scratched tape, but between the static he saw it clearly. A tall figure, blacker than the night, with antlers spiraling backward like jagged thorns, standing behind the church steeple, watching him, as if it had always been there, as if it had been waiting. Eli fled down the main road toward the mine entrance. The old shaft had collapsed years ago, but something told him the truth was buried beneath it. He reached it by instinct, like his feet already knew the path. The wooden planks that had once sealed the mine were broken now, fresh, recently torn open. Something had come out. Or maybe, something had gone back in. With trembling hands, Eli clicked on his headlamp and descended. The air changed the farther he went down, not just in temperature but in texture. It felt thick, syrupy, like it didn't want to let him through. Old machinery rusted into the rock, narrow beams bent at awkward angles. There were claw marks on the walls, not scratches, not tool cuts. Claw marks. The mine opened into a cavern, vast and cold, lit by a strange blue glow that seemed to bleed from the walls themselves. At the center of the chamber was a chair, a modern one, hospital grade, like the ones in the church basement. Straps hung loosely from its arms. A camera faced the chair, and on the screen behind it, Eli's face. Not live, recorded. It played on a loop. Over and over he watched himself wake up in the same chair, mouth gagged, eyes wild, screaming silently. Then the screen would flicker, restart, and play again. Next to the chair, a clipboard. Subject 34, Elijah Grant. Test group, echo loop current. Status, dissociation threshold. Breached. There were other names, all missing persons, from different states. Vanished near ghost towns, national parks, small forgotten roads. Some of them were marked. Integrated. Rejected. Silenced. A whisper filled the cavern. This time, not from behind. It came from inside his own skull. You, remember now. His nose began to bleed. Memories cracked through his mind like ice splitting on a frozen lake. He wasn't a documentarian. Not really. He had been here before, years ago, as a child, with his parents. But they weren't travelers. They were staff, Researchers, specialists, part of whatever underground program had been buried with Dagger Flats, and Eli. He had been one of the subjects. They had erased his memories, planted a new life, a passion for ghost towns and cameras, a desire to return, because that's how it worked. The town didn't call you unless you'd already belonged to it, unless it still owned a part of you. He turned to run, but the cavern changed. The path behind him twisted, walls pulsing like living flesh. The blue glow turned red, and the whispers rose into a deafening chorus of voices, all calling his name. Elijah Grant, welcome back to the Hollow. From the shadows behind the chair, the figure emerged again, taller now, its face still obscured by void, antlers now dripping with something dark and steaming. Eli's knees buckled, the camera in his pocket burned hot. It had never been recording for the outside world. It had been recording for them. For it. The antlered thing reached forward, not to strike, not to kill, but to touch. Just a hand. Just a single cold fingertip on Eli's forehead. And with that, everything went black. It took search teams 3 weeks to find him. He was discovered lying just outside the ruins of Dagger Flats, near the collapsed entrance of the old mine. No equipment, no camera, no bag, just Eli, alive, but unconscious. His skin was ice cold, clothes damp with morning dew, and he murmured words no one could understand. He woke up in a hospital in Nevada. He couldn't recall how he got there. When the doctors asked, Eli said he'd been exploring a ghost town. But after that, nothing. Just flashes. A blue light. A chair. A mirror that didn't work right. A nurse found him one night writing on the hospital wall in charcoal over and over. I was already there. I didn't just visit. I came home. Eli returned to his apartment weeks later. He was quiet, isolated, refused all interview requests, deleted all social media, and stopped answering his phone. He never posted the footage. There was none to post. The SD cards in his drone and his camera were blank, factory reset, as if they'd never been used. But every night at exactly 3:03 a.m., Eli would wake up in a cold sweat, not from nightmares, but from silence. A silence so complete it screamed. Sometimes he'd find fresh dirt under his fingernails, sometimes faint scratches on his arms he couldn't explain. Once he woke to find a rusty miner's tag on his pillow, etched with the number 34, the same number from the clipboard in the mine. One night, 6 months later, he received a package with no return address. Inside was a USB stick and a single note. Your memories are not yours. What you think is footage was a recording of you. Don't return to Dagger Flats. It remembers. The USB was empty. At least, it looked empty. But when Eli opened it at exactly 3:03 a.m., a single video file appeared. No name. Just a flickering thumbnail of a face. His face. He pressed play. It showed him sitting in the church basement again, years older, lips trembling, eyes wide. He whispered one sentence over and over until the screen went black. It lives beneath, and it always wants you back. After that night, Eli stopped sleeping, stopped eating much. He began painting the same image over and over. A tall figure with spiraling antlers, standing at the edge of a ghost town that no longer showed up on any map. But the worst part? Dagger Flats is still there, still empty, still quiet, still waiting. And every so often, on a forgotten YouTube channel with no followers and no name, a new video appears. Blurry, silent, less than a minute long. Always showing the same place. The dusty street of an abandoned town. The church at the center and a figure standing at the mine's entrance. Not moving, not waving, just waiting, as if the next visitor has already been chosen, and they just haven't remembered it yet. They say ghost towns are places where time stands still, where the past lingers like dust in the air, and silence wraps itself around every broken building like a shroud. But in Dagger Flats, time doesn't just stand still. It rewinds, replays, and reclaims what it once owned. Eli no longer speaks about what he saw. He walks the streets of his city like a man out of step with the world, as if a piece of him is still underground, strapped to that chair, whispering truths only the silence can hear. And somewhere beneath the ruin of a forgotten town, the thing with antlers waits in the dark, watching the road, studying the wind, listening for the sound of tires on gravel. Because once you hear the call of Dagger Flats, you don't just remember the town remembers you.